16-year-old Suzanne Capper was lured to Jean Powell's home in Mostyn, Manchester, on December 7, 1992. Upon arrival, she was immediately ambushed by Glenn Powell and Anthony Dudson. The two men forcibly restrained her as Glenn shaved off her head and eyebrows. Suzanne was then ordered to clean up the hair and dispose of it in a bin. Following this, a plastic bag was placed over her head, and she was struck repeatedly on the head. Once the bag was removed, Jean Powell and Bernadette McNeely kicked her while she lay curled on the floor. The beating escalated when the two women took turns hitting Suzanne with a 3-foot-long wooden instrument and a belt. She was then taken to the bathroom and forced to shave off her pubic hair. This act was described by her attackers as a form of ritual humiliation, supposedly in retaliation for a situation involving Dudson and McNeely. The cruelty did not end there. That night, Jean Powell locked Suzanne inside a cupboard, initiating a 7-day period of captivity and torture. This event marked the beginning of one of the most brutal and senseless crimes in recent UK history. Suzanne, a teenager with her life ahead of her, was subjected to dehumanizing abuse that stripped away her dignity. Her captors showed no empathy, only a relentless drive to dominate, humiliate, and inflict pain. The acts committed on that first night set the tone for the following week, during which Suzanne would endure unimaginable suffering at the hands of those she once knew. The following morning, Suzanne was moved upstairs and locked in another cupboard. Her captors became concerned that Jean and Bernadette's 6 children were being disturbed by Suzanne's cries. As a result, she was transferred to Bernadette McNeely's house. There, Suzanne's ordeal escalated to even more horrifying levels. She was tied spread-eagle to an upturned bed using electrical flex in a back room. From that point forward, her abuse intensified with methodical cruelty. Over the next 5 days, Suzanne was subjected to a relentless cycle of torture. She was regularly beaten, injected with amphetamines, and burned with cigarettes. Psychological torment accompanied the physical brutality. Rave music was blasted into her ears through headphones at maximum volume. Most disturbingly, the track, "Hi, I'm Chucky, Wanna Play?" containing sound bites from the horror film Child's Play, was played repeatedly. Before each new round of abuse, Bernadette McNeely would initiate the session by announcing, "Chucky's coming to play." Suzanne lay tied down, unable to move or escape, isolated in a room filled with noise, pain, and fear. Her captors exercised complete control over her body and mind, showing no remorse or hesitation. The mixture of drugging, beating, and sensory torture formed a deliberate campaign to break her spirit. This section of Suzanne's captivity highlighted not only physical violence, but a calculated effort to dehumanize her. Her attackers used music, restraints, and repeated abuse as instruments of psychological warfare. The house where she was held became a chamber of terror, detached from the outside world, where cruelty flourished unchecked. During Suzanne's captivity, 2 additional individuals, Clifford Pook and Jeffrey Lee, visited Bernadette McNeely's house and directly witnessed her condition. Suzanne was blindfolded, gagged, and tied to the upturned bed. She had been lying in her own urine and feces for several days, unable to move or clean herself. The sight was horrific. Yet instead of helping her, the visitors escalated the abuse. Suzanne was dragged to the bathroom and placed into a bath filled with concentrated disinfectant. A stiff brush was then used to scrub her skin with such force that it removed layers of flesh. The pain she endured during this act was unimaginable, yet the torment did not end there. In one of the most gruesome episodes of her captivity, Clifford Pook used pliers to forcibly extract 2 of Suzanne's teeth. This horrific act was later described by Anthony Dudson, who stood nearby with Jean Powell and Bernadette. Pook removed Suzanne's gag, told her to open her mouth, and began smashing her teeth with the pliers. After repeated strikes and yanking, he finally succeeded in pulling 2 teeth. According to Dudson, Pook laughed during the act and later kept the extracted teeth in his home as grotesque trophies. This section underscores how the violence against Suzanne was not limited to her initial captors. Others became involved, either actively participating or passively allowing it to continue. It revealed a chilling level of complicity and a complete disregard for human suffering. Suzanne's world had narrowed to a single room, visited only by those who came to inflict more harm. In the early hours of December 14, 1992, Suzanne's captors decided to dispose of her. She was forced into the boot of a stolen white Fiat Panda and driven approximately 15 miles to Werneth-Low, located near Stockport. In the car were Bernadette McNeely, Jean Powell, Glenn Powell, and Anthony Dudson. Bernadette reportedly giggled during the drive. Once they arrived at a secluded bramble-covered embankment, Suzanne was pushed down into the undergrowth. Bernadette attempted to ignite petrol poured over Suzanne, but struggled to do so. Glenn Powell and Dudson then intervened, making multiple attempts to start the fire. Eventually, they succeeded in setting Suzanne alight. During this final act of unimaginable cruelty, Bernadette began to sing lyrics from the Tramp's song Disco Inferno, repeating, "Burn, baby, burn." As Suzanne burned, her attackers left her alone in the darkness. They made no effort to ensure she was dead. The intention was clear. They wanted her gone, erased from their world. But against all odds, Suzanne's body did not give up. This final ordeal represents the most devastating act of violence in the entire sequence of abuse. After 7 days of torture, Suzanne was discarded like trash and set on fire while still alive. The inhumanity shown in this act defies comprehension. It was not a spontaneous act of rage, but a coordinated, chillingly executed decision to eliminate a helpless victim. It demonstrated the extent to which empathy and morality had vanished among those involved. Despite burns covering 80% of her body, Suzanne Capper defied death one final time. After her attackers fled, she managed to crawl out of the brambles and climb back up the embankment. Incredibly, she staggered for nearly a quarter of a mile to reach Comstall Road. At 6:10 a.m., Barry Sutcliffe and 2 colleagues were driving to work when they found Suzanne. Horrified by her condition, they immediately sought help from a nearby house. There, Michael and Margaret Coop answered the door. Suzanne was in an unimaginable state. Michael described her hands as looking like ash and her legs as resembling raw meat. Despite her condition, Suzanne remained polite, constantly thanking Margaret for her assistance. Margaret later recounted how she instinctively tried to hug Suzanne, only for the girl to recoil, her injuries too severe for physical contact. Her head was completely shaved, her face swollen, and almost unrecognizable. Yet her will to survive had carried her through. She had no shoes, her feet charred from fire, and she could not hold a glass of water on her own due to the injuries to her hands. This section of Suzanne's story is as heartbreaking as it is powerful. It reflects her extraordinary resilience and determination to live, even after enduring a level of suffering that defies belief. The humanity shown by Barry Sutcliffe and the Coops in her moment of need stands in stark contrast to the cruelty she had endured. Suzanne's escape was not just a physical act. It was a final act of resistance against those who had tried to destroy her. Suzanne was rushed to Withington Hospital, where medical staff began emergency treatment. Despite the severity of her injuries, she remained conscious long enough to identify her attackers. She named all 6 individuals involved and gave police the address of Jean and Glenn Powell. Her information became the cornerstone of the investigation. Suzanne's injuries were so severe that her mother and stepfather could not recognize her. Her head had been shaved, her face was swollen, and her body was covered in burns. The only way she could be positively identified was through a partial fingerprint taken from her thumb, the only part of her hand not completely destroyed by fire. Shortly after providing her statement, Suzanne slipped into a coma. Despite the best efforts of doctors and nurses, she succumbed to multiple organ failure and died on December 18, 1992, 4 days after being set alight. Her death marked the end of a week-long ordeal that remains among the most disturbing crimes in modern British history. Suzanne's bravery in the face of death ensured that justice could be pursued. She did not die in silence. She used her final strength to make sure her attackers were named and brought to account. The medical professionals who tried to save her witnessed firsthand the extent of human cruelty and the resilience of a young girl determined to survive. Her final moments were marked by unimaginable pain, but also by purpose. Suzanne Capper's voice was heard, even as her life slipped away. Her death did not mark the end of the story. It marked the beginning of a fight for justice that would follow. Following Suzanne Capper's death, Greater Manchester Police acted swiftly. Detective Inspector Peter Wall led the investigation. On the morning of December 14, 1992, at 7:30 a.m., officers secured 97 Langworthy Road and arrested all occupants. The horror of the case unfolded rapidly. As the evidence mounted, Detective Wall remarked, "As the story began to unfold, we just couldn't believe it." Forensic examination revealed disturbing details. Hair samples were recovered from an outdoor waste container. Tools used to extract Suzanne's teeth were found stored alongside Christmas decorations. So deeply moved were the officers that they collectively paid for flowers to be sent to Suzanne's hospital bed. Court proceedings began on November 16, 1993, lasting 22 days. Throughout the trial, the jury was visibly shaken, especially during descriptions of the torture Suzanne endured. Each defendant offered conflicting accounts, attempting to shift blame, but the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. After 9 hours and 52 minutes of deliberation, the jury delivered guilty verdicts on December 16th. Jean Powell, Bernadette McNeely, and Glenn Powell received life sentences with minimum terms of 25 years. Anthony Dudson, who was 16 at the time, received a reduced sentence of 16 years. Clifford Pook and Jeffrey Lee were sentenced to 15 and 12 years, respectively. As the sentences were announced, Suzanne's family cried out in relief, shouting, "Yes! Yes!" Over time, all 6 individuals were released on parole. Their return to society has sparked public outrage and reignited debates around sentencing for violent crimes. For Suzanne's family, each release reopened deep emotional wounds. The case of Suzanne Capper continues to stand as one of the UK's most disturbing crimes. Its legal legacy still referenced today. Despite her death, Suzanne ensured her killers were named, and her voice helped bring them to justice.